Hello and welcome to a special episode, Training Spotlight Insights from our PRCA experts. I'm your host, Souha Khairallah, and today we're diving into the PRCA Leadership Academy, a two-day program designed for PR and communications professionals stepping into or preparing for leadership roles. We'll explore the Academy's focus on practical, essential skills from strategic thinking and crisis management to fostering inclusivity and refining leadership capabilities. I'm thrilled to be joined by three exceptional trainers from the Academy, Ewing, Hartley, and Tamara Littleton. Together, we'll unpack the session's insights and the impact they're making on future leaders in our industry. Hi, everyone. So happy to be here with you.
Oh, it's great to be here.
Some of my favourite people, I have to say, be out there. So let's start with Emma. Emma Ewing is a PR trainer, coach, and consultant specialising in communication, people management, and personal effectiveness. With years of experience in in-house roles, the public sector and high-tech PR consultancy, she now works with organisations worldwide to deliver practical and impactful training. So, Emma, your session, which is one of my favourites, leading the way with feedback, focuses on providing confident, critical, and positive feedback. Why do you think feedback is such a critical skill for new leaders?
Oh, well, when you're a leader, you've got a team of people. It might be a small team, it might be a big team. One of your big functions as a leader is to build and nurture them into a high-performing team. And you can't have high performance without effective communication. And that includes letting people know what they're doing well, how they can improve. Actually, crucially, and I think this is really big for feedback, particularly for emerging leaders, it shouldn't just be coming from you. It's about a leader equipping the whole team to be able to share feedback effectively in a way that feels appropriate and actually acts as a multiplier for performance so that everyone's taking shared ownership for driving improvements.
Absolutely.
Can I add another biggie?
Please do.
I know we're looking at one, but
a
small point, but I think everyone listening and certainly around this table too, we could resonate is when feedback is done badly, when it's bungled, if it's delivered clumsily, it can be so harmful. So it's really important to get this right.
Very, very true. Thank you so much. And you've worked globally with PR professionals. Can you share a universal challenge leaders face when it comes to giving feedback, how they can overcome it?
Well, I thought about this, and I think one of the things that's perhaps the thread running through is that in our industry, people work really, really hard. There's not a single person who doesn't answer how you're doing with, I'm really, really busy. And if people are busy and working hard, actually, I hear so many leaders say, I don't want to demotivate them by giving them any kind of critical feedback because they're working so hard. And yet, if you can't get past that, people will be left in the dark about where they aren't succeeding. Without good targeted feedback, you're actually harming someone's career progression. And then you ask how to get past this. I think a simple mindset shift is to understand firstly that it's perfectly possible to be both kind and clear.
Very true. Yeah.
Clarity is going to help.
Definitely. And I mean, for me, I find the session so practical and it's so helpful and so crucial and so important for everyone. So now on to the final question with you, Emma. What's one piece of advice you'd give to new leaders who might feel hesitant about giving critical feedback?
Oh, that's one. That was hard. Don't ask me to just bring it down to one. However, I mean, there are obviously lots of ways to do this depending on the situation, and we cover all of those in the course. Something I think, though, that could make a lot of difference immediately is making sure that you provide frequent, low-stakes feedback on what people are doing well and what they need to improve, because then it becomes part and parcel of your everyday communication as a leader. It doesn't have to be a big thing. It means people get used to feedback when it's relatively easy to make changes, and then it avoids that awful situation where someone sat on feedback for ages, and then it's a much bigger deal by the time it all comes out. So yes, that whole frequent, low stakes, I'm noticing what you're doing, really works.
Thank you so much. That's so useful. Thank you, Emily. Now we're going to chat to Hartley and Tamara Littleton. Very excited about this. Kate Hartley and Tamara Littleton are the first founders of Polpeo, a crisis simulation company. Kate is a seasoned crisis communications consultant and trainer, author of Communication Crisis, and a university lecturer specializing in understanding human behavior during crisis. Tamara, also the founder of The Social Element, is an award-winning leader in social media strategy, named Campaign's Inspirational Woman CEO in 2024, and a regular on YouTube's top 100 global LGBTQ+ executives list. Together, they bring unparalleled expertise in crisis leadership. So good to have you here. And I'm going to start with you, Kate. So, Kate, your session, Leadership in a Crisis, focuses on high-pressure leadership situations. What inspired you and Tamara to create this session for the PRCA Leadership Academy?
Well, Tamara and my background are both agency and sort of broad communications. So Tamara being social media, as you said, and my background being PR. But I think crisis communications is such an important part of your leadership skill set. Most businesses will go through a crisis at some point. And as a leader, whether you're a leader of the business or whether you're the communications team leader, you need that skill set. You need to really up your skills in crisis communications and more broadly in crisis management if you're in the operational side of the business. And we've been talking to a lot of communications teams, both agency side and in-house, and they say that they need to upskill their people in crisis. And this is the perfect opportunity to do that. The Leadership Academy is a brilliant course to help people get to that next level of leadership, and crisis is, as I said, a really important part of that. And also, how do you experience a crisis? How do you get experience in crisis comms until you've experienced a crisis?
Yes.
And it's this sort of, we have to give people a way to practice and rehearse a crisis, which is what these simulations do. So I think that's why it's really important to do that as part of the Leadership Academy.
Thank you so much, Kate. And I have to say that all these sessions are very practical. It's a safe environment, and it's a bit like therapy, which everyone really, truly embraces. So thank you so much. Tamara, with your background in social media, how has the digital landscape influenced the way leaders need to manage crisis today?
Well, I think one of the critical things is the speed of how fast everything is happening on social media, for example. And so when a crisis breaks, there is no sort of luxury of spending time writing a lovely response. It all has to be done so quickly. And it's something that, again, we see in the courses that we do with you with the crisis simulations. The feedback that we get is that people say it's so realistic because it's fast and they're having to think on their feet, they're having to work together. So that speed is the first thing. The other thing that I think has changed over the years is the sort of the mob mentality. It's the fact that people will jump on the bandwagon of any issue, rumours circulating or people just, a general backlash. And that's been harder for people to deal with, as a company, as a brand, as a government organisation. It's just a change in the dynamic. So that's something that has definitely happened over the years. And the other thing, as a kind of a critical thing, is misinformation. So again, rumours, lies, misinformation being spread. You just have to be prepared for it, and so that is perhaps at its highest rate at the moment, and that is something that people have really wanted to sort of have help in dealing with. On the positive side, you are able to use things like monitoring and social media monitoring tools to see what people are saying. That helps you come in with a good response. So it's not all bad, but it's definitely different.
Thank you for that. Yes. So both of you, Kate and Tamara, co-host the podcast What Just Happened. From your discussions there, what's a key insight that has resonated with your audience about leadership during crisis?
I mean, we love doing the podcast, and some of the feedback that we've got is that some of the themes are really resonating. So one of the ones that I'd like to sort of share is about psychological safety and setting the culture of an organisation. And we actually touched on this when we did our podcast around Wells Fargo and what happened there. You'll have to tune into that podcast. But it's a critical part of crisis management, because when you have a culture of psychological safety in your team, you're more likely to, the team is more likely to take risks in a positive way. And also it means that they feel that they have a voice and they can be heard and they can challenge authority. And that is really critical in a crisis.
I'm going to build on that actually, because there's something I think that is related to that, which is how your team behaves in line with its values. And you can only do that if you have a psychologically safe environment, can't you? I think so. To having the courage to be able to behave in a way that you know is to do the right thing, not just what is necessarily, you know, the legal thing, for example, but what's actually the right thing to do, means you have to behave in line with your values. And I think we've seen that across a lot of the different podcasts, haven't we? That the behaviour doesn't always match up to values in a crisis from brands. And also the ability to connect with people and have empathy. I know we're going to talk a little bit about empathy later on, so the ability to connect with people is really, really important. And a lot of leaders take bad advice. So I think getting the right people in the room to make the right decisions and get the right advice is something, again, that we've seen coming across through mistakes that people have made in the past, and some of the examples we've looked at in the podcast.
Thank you so much. So yes, Kate, on to empathy, which I know is so important to you, and something that you really go into a lot, which is so like, yeah, I love that personally. I think it's so important. So Kate, what role does empathy play in crisis communication, and how can leaders effectively balance it with strategy?
Well, I think if you don't have empathy, you're going to lose trust. And we saw that when again, in the podcast, we looked at the BP Deepwater Horizon disaster with Tony Hayward. And if you don't have empathy, or you don't show you have empathy, people will just disengage from you, and therefore they won't believe what you're saying. But I think there are two types of empathy. You need empathy in a crisis situation, but of course, to show you have empathy, you have to actually have empathy.
Yes.
A lot of people say, well, how can we express empathy in this situation? You think, well, you kind of need to have it. And when we're doing training, a lot of people will come up to me afterwards and say, I've got a bit of an issue because my leader doesn't really have empathy. So how do we then get that across? And then there are some difficult discussions to be made about, is that the right person to be representing you during the crisis? And also you can learn empathy to an extent by practicing things like radical listening. But I always tell organisations to switch their thinking. So instead of, most companies in a crisis will say, what do I need to say to defend my reputation? And if you switch that thinking to, what do other people need from me in order to get through this crisis successfully? That's empathy. You're putting yourself in their shoes. So I think if you're thinking about the experience that your customers or the people affected by the crisis are going through, then you're going to come up with the right solutions to actually, solve the crisis and get to the heart of the problem. But you also need a little bit of distance. There are effectively two types of empathy: cognitive and effective empathy. And effective empathy is, if you cry, I cry. And we all do that in certain situations. Yes. Cognitive empaths tend to go, I understand how you're feeling, but I don't feel it.
Okay.
And actually, you do sometimes need a bit of distance. You don't want your leadership team all to be crying when something terrible's happening in the business. Yeah. You want them to kind of have that little bit of objectivity as well. So it's just getting that balance right, I think, is really important.
Absolutely. Tamara, inclusivity is a significant aspect of leadership. How can leaders ensure they're addressing diverse needs effectively during challenging times?
It's kind of worrying that it's 2025 and there is a backlash against diversity, equity and inclusion at the moment, and that we're having to even justify why does diversity and inclusion matters. So I would say that while some big companies are rolling back on their commitments, I would argue that now is when leaders should double down on inclusivity and diverse teams to ensure you have multiple viewpoints in the room. And it kind of connects back to what I was saying about psychological safety and people feeling that they matter and have a voice. But I'd also say look at learning styles and neurodiversity as well, because taking into account how people communicate and learn is so critical when you're actually working in a crisis. You need to understand people's just how their brains think. So I think, we have to look at all of those aspects.
And Tamara, do you remember that amazing leadership coach, Mark Fritz, that we interviewed on the podcast?
Yes.
And one of the things that he always says is you have to develop more than one option for your crisis. Otherwise, you think the one option you have is a good one. If you've got a load of people that think the same thing, they're only going to come up with one option. And it might be a terrible, terrible one. So you want lots of different thought processes going on. It can be messy, but it's always good.
And I know, Sue, that this is covered in some of the other training courses as well, in much more detail as well.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. It's been so insightful, and I feel like so much is linked together. And this is why kind of what we try and do with the program is to link it all so that it kind of merges into one big learning for everyone. So finally, what's one more practical exercise or tool from Polpeo's crisis simulation that you'd recommend for preparing leaders to handle real-world crises?
Can we have one each?
Yes, go for it. Go for it. One each.
We are now one blended person.
I think you are a person. Mine, I think, would be an empathy exercise. So during the crisis training, we will often say to communicators, read out your statements to each other and get somebody to role play one of the people who's being affected by the crisis and just hear what that statement sounds like. And I absolutely guarantee you 90% of statements that are written in a crisis would not get through that process. It makes you realise that you're sounding corporate or cold. It gives you kind of empathy. It makes you think about who you're actually talking to. So that would be my learning.
And mine, I suppose, is really to do a simulation versus a desktop, because it is so different to, just talking about a crisis. If you're actually going through one, it feels immersive, it's realistic, and it tests your team's dynamic, because it's not all about how do you come up with the best response, how do you test your team's communication skills. It's how do they work together as a team, and all of that comes through in during a simulation. And something that we kind of do on top of that is the media training aspect of actually sticking a camera in someone's face and getting them to talk to a pretend journalist. I've become very good at being a journalist now.
You're brutal.
But again, it gives you that muscle memory of this is what it actually feels like to go through a crisis.
Great. Yes, all about basically trying, experimenting, practicing, and all of these things help so much.
Absolutely.
Thank you. So Emma, Kate and Tamara, thank you so much for joining us today and for sharing your insights into the PRCA Leadership Academy. It's clear the programme is not just about teaching leadership skills, but about shaping confident, compassionate and capable leaders for the future. To our listeners, if you're a PR communications professional or have a team member looking to step into leadership or has just stepped into leadership, the PRCA Leadership Programme might be exactly what you need. Visit www.prca.global-training for more information. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.